You opened it again. The app, the message thread, the inbox, the number on the screen. You told yourself it was just to check, just to see if anything had changed, just to know whether what you had been holding inwardly had begun to appear outwardly. And for a moment before the screen loaded, there was a kind of held breath, a waiting, a hope that the world would finally confirm what you had been trying to believe. That moment, that held breath before the number appears, before the message arrives or does not arrive, before the sign comes or stays absent, that moment is what this teaching is about. Not the number, not the message, not the account balance or the silence or the closed door. The moment before, the question inside that moment, and the invisible decision you're making every single time you reach for proof before you have established cause. Most people do not realize they are doing it. They believe they are simply being responsible, simply staying informed, simply tracking reality. But beneath the practical gesture of checking, there is often something else operating. There is a question that has not been spoken aloud, but is running beneath every look, every refresh, every listening for the phone. The question is this: has it worked yet? And underneath that question is a deeper one. Can I believe now? This teaching will not shame you for checking. It will not tell you that looking at your life is wrong. What it will do is open the mechanism beneath the habit. Because Ernest Holmes, one of the clearest voices in the tradition of spiritual law, placed this in the precise order of cause and effect. And what he teaches inverts nearly everything the fearful mind assumes about how reality is created. Before you check for proof, you must decide what is cause. That decision changes everything that follows. Here is the hidden architecture of the checking habit. You say, and you may sincerely believe, that consciousness is cause. You have heard the teaching. You have repeated it. You may have written it down. Consciousness precedes condition. The inner state creates the outer experience. The subconscious pattern becomes the visible world. You know this. And yet, when the visible world does not immediately reflect the inner work, something inside you goes to the world for permission to continue believing. This is the contradiction that Ernest Holmes would name directly. You cannot hold consciousness as cause in theory and then require the appearance to validate it in practice. The moment proof becomes the standard by which you decide whether to believe, the appearance has become your master and consciousness has become your servant. You have reversed the order of the law, not in your words, but in your practice. Notice how it operates in daily life. You do the inner work. You pray, affirm, accept, imagine, decree. You feel a shift. Something inside you settles, even briefly. And then, within hours or days, the hand goes to the phone, the eyes go to the screen, the ears tilt toward the silence, listening for the sound that would mean yes, it is happening. This is not simply curiosity. This is the inner state returning to the appearance for instruction. This is the cause asking the effect whether it is real, and the effect, the number, the silence, the unchanged condition, does not lie. It reports accurately, but it reports the past. It reports the impression that was accepted before, not the cause that has just been planted. So when you check the appearance for confirmation of new inner work, you are almost always reading the harvest of the previous season. And because that harvest looks like the old pattern, you conclude that the inner work has not taken hold. You return to doubt. You replant from fear. And the cycle continues. There is something important to understand here. The need for proof is not weakness. It is not stupidity. It is not spiritual failure. It is a signal. It is the signal that authority has not yet been fully settled inward. When a person genuinely knows they are the cause, they do not wait anxiously for the effect to confirm it. They act. They move. They engage with conditions calmly because the source of their certainty is not located in the conditions. But when authority is still divided between inside and outside, the checking habit is almost automatic. It is the inner state reaching for something solid to stand on. But this is where the hidden inversion begins. The solid place cannot be found in the appearance. Proof is not a foundation. Proof is a report, and a report, read through fear, will always feel like a verdict. The number becomes a judge, the silence becomes a sentence, the unchanged condition becomes a law unto itself. And none of those things have the authority that the checking habit has granted them. Emmett Fox would add to this, by pointing us toward the principle of spiritual allegiance. Where you place your attention is where you are placing your faith. If you are checking the appearance for permission to believe, you are functionally worshipping the appearance, not in doctrine, in practice. The daily act of going to the outer world as the final word is a form of spiritual allegiance that bypasses the inner source entirely. What this teaching is building toward is a simple but profound reordering, not the abolition of checking, not the pretense that appearances do not exist, but a new decision made consciously about which comes first: cause or proof, authority or permission, the inner command or the outer report. Ernest Holmes made this order the centerpiece of his entire body of work, and in the next section we will open exactly what he saw. Ernest Holmes spent his life working in the space between the visible world and the invisible order that produces it. His great contribution to the tradition of spiritual law was not sentiment, and it was not religion in the narrow sense of the word. It was precision. He approached the relationship between consciousness and condition, the way a scientist approaches the relationship between a law and its demonstration. He was not interested in hoping that the mind shaped reality. He was interested in understanding exactly how it did, and exactly why the process failed when it failed. The central principle Holmes taught can be stated simply, though its implications are not simple at all. Mind is first cause, not second cause, not one of several causes, not a contributing factor to an outcome that is ultimately decided by external forces. First cause, the accepted inner pattern, the deeply held belief, the impressed subconscious state, the consciousness you are carrying right now, this is what precedes and produces the conditions of your visible life. Holmes drew this from a long tradition, from the ancient premise that the invisible governs the visible. From the metaphysical reading of the Christian scriptures, particularly the teaching that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. From the conviction shared across idealist philosophy, New Thought, and contemplative Christianity alike, that the outer world is not the originating layer of reality. It is the expressed layer. It is the surface through which an inner pattern has become visible. This is not mysticism for its own sake. Holmes translated it into a working principle. If the inner pattern is the cause, then any change you want to see in your life must begin with a change in the inner pattern, not a change in behavior, though behavior will change as a consequence, not a change in strategy, though strategy will clarify, a change in the accepted inner state, in what the deep mind is holding as true, in what consciousness has agreed to be real about you, about supply, about God, about your place in the order of things. Now here is where this becomes directly relevant to the checking habit. If mind is first cause, then the visible condition you are checking right now is not the origin of your situation. It is the delayed display of a previous inner cause. What you see on the screen, in the account, in the relationship, in the body, in the response from the world, is the current expression of what the deep mind accepted as true sometime before this moment. It is real, but it is not the origin. It is not the source, it is the echo. Holmes was careful to say that this principle does not place instant control over outer events in the hands of the individual. The law works, as all laws work, through a process. A seed does not become a tree in the moment it is planted. The inner cause does not become the outer condition in the hour of the prayer. There is a gestation, a development, an unfolding that belongs to the law itself. Your part is the cause. The timing and the form of the expression belong to the deeper order of things. This is a critical point for those who check for proof. If you plant a cause today and check for visible evidence tomorrow, you are almost certainly going to be reading the fruit of an earlier planting. The appearance has not yet caught up with the new inner state. And if you allow the old appearance to reassign authority over your consciousness, you will uproot the new cause before it has had time to express. This is the tragedy Holmes saw in the cycle of sincere people who work inwardly and then surrender outwardly. The law is not failing in those moments. The person is simply misreading the timeline. They are treating the delayed effect as a verdict on the cause. They are allowing the old harvest to speak against the new seed. They are checking yesterday's weather to decide whether to plant today. And every time the inner state retreats because the outer appearance has not yet changed, the cause retreats with it. Holmes would say this clearly: the appearance cannot tell you whether your cause is real. Only the cause can confirm the cause. You must go inward to verify the inward work, not outward. If the inner state is settled and clear and accepted, the cause is alive. Whether the outer world has yet reflected, it is a question of timing, not of truth. Now understand what this means for your prayer, your affirmation, your inner work, your practice. It means that the standard of success is not the visible result. The standard is the accepted inner state. If you can hold the cause clearly, if the deep mind has genuinely received the new impression, if there is a quality of settled acceptance beneath the words, then the law is already working. The appearance will follow. That is not faith in the poetic sense. That is the mechanics of the law as Holmes taught it. If this kind of sacred law speaks to something deep in you, subscribe to this channel. Sacred logic exists for those who are no longer satisfied with surface-level spiritual motivation. This channel is for those who want the law explained with enough precision to actually change the inner order. Every teaching here is built to deepen the one before it. If you are here for that, subscribe and stay. The inner cause precedes the outer condition. This is not a metaphor. In the teaching of Ernest Holmes, this is the fundamental order of the creative process. And the moment you allow a visible condition to overrule the inner cause, you have not engaged with that condition responsibly. You have surrendered your authority to it. The distinction matters more than almost anything else in the entire field of practical spiritual law. There is a difference, and it is a difference that Holmes considered central, between reading a condition and obeying it, between informing yourself through the outer world and receiving instruction from it, between using the appearance as data and using it as a decree. This distinction is not subtle. Once you see it, it reshapes every moment of contact with the visible world. A condition can tell you what has been. It can show you the current expression of a previous inner pattern. It can point you toward where attention has been given, where fear has been accepted as authority, where the subconscious has been impressed with limitation or with supply. In this sense, a condition is useful. It is honest. It reflects something real about what has been held as cause. Reading it clearly, without drama, without surrender, is wisdom. But the moment you allow the condition to name what must be, to decide whether belief is warranted, to determine the limits of your inner authority, you have crossed from reading the appearance to obeying it. And when you obey the appearance, you are accepting it as cause. You are giving the effect the power to generate the next cycle of cause. And since the effect is the expression of limitation, of the old story of the previous fear, you are now planting the next season of that same harvest. Holmes was precise about this. He distinguished between the conditions that are and the truth of what is possible. Both are real in their own domains. The condition is real as an effect. The spiritual truth is real as cause. And the creative individual, the person who is working with the law deliberately, must be capable of holding both without confusing their order. The condition exists. It is real. It has consequences. It requires practical engagement, but it does not have the final word on what can be. It does not author your identity or your destiny. Think about what this means when applied to money, to health, to relationship, to work, to any area where you are looking outward for confirmation that things are improving. The number on the screen is evidence of a previous inner cause. The closed door is evidence of what has been accepted. The silence where a response should be is reporting the harvest of an earlier planting. None of these are final. None of these are pronouncing what must continue. They are showing you what has been. This is not a comfortable thing to hear, because it means that the conditions you dislike are in some sense a report on your own inner life. But Holmes did not use this to shame anyone. He used it to locate the power. If the condition is the expression of the inner state, then the inner state is where the creative authority lives, and the creative authority can be changed. The inner state can receive a new instruction. The deep mind can hold a different cause, and when it does, the condition must eventually change, because the condition is the effect, not the source. But here is the layer most people do not reach. Even if you accept that consciousness is cause in theory, the question is whether you accept it in the moment of difficulty. When the number is low and the pressure is high, and the silence has stretched into weeks, can you read that appearance without obeying it? Can you use that condition as information without allowing it to become your instruction? Can you remain the cause while calmly engaging with an effect that has not yet caught up with your inner work? This is the maturity Holmes was pointing toward. Not denial, not the pretense that the condition does not exist or does not matter, not a performance of false positivity over genuine difficulty, but a clear, stable, inwardly settled recognition that the appearance is evidence of what has been, not a verdict on what must be, and that between the current appearance and the next appearing, the cause that is being held right now is the decisive variable. The appearance can inform your decisions. You can read a financial condition and make practical adjustments. You can notice a health symptom and seek appropriate care. You can read a closed door and look for another channel. None of this contradicts the law. The law does not ask you to be blind. It asks you to be appropriately ordered. The appearance informs action, but the cause precedes both. Before you act on what you see, you must know what you are holding as cause. Because the action taken from fear plants a different seed than the action taken from authority. Read the condition. Acknowledge it honestly. Let it inform your practical choices, but do not let it name your future. Do not let it assign authority over your consciousness. Do not let it decide what the deep mind should accept as true about you, your supply, or your God. That decision belongs to you. It belongs to the cause. And the cause, Holmes taught, is always inward first. Every condition you are looking at right now is a report. It is reporting accurately. It is showing you the expression of what has been held as real in the deep mind. This is useful information. This is honest feedback from the law itself. But a report is not a decree. A report is not a sentence. A report is not a wall. It is a current reading of a previous pattern, and the pattern can always be changed at the level of cause, which is always, in Holmes's framework, the level of consciousness. This is the foundation on which the rest of this teaching will build. The appearance is evidence, not origin. It can inform you, but it cannot author you. And once that distinction is held clearly, the entire habit of checking for proof begins to be understood in a different light, not as responsibility, not as discernment, but as the question of whether you are returning to the cause or still looking to the effect for permission to believe. There is an error that is very difficult to catch precisely because it wears the appearance of wisdom. It disguises itself as responsibility, as groundedness, as spiritual discernment, as the mature practice of staying connected to reality. And because it looks so much like wisdom, it is rarely questioned. It is rarely held up and examined for what it actually is. The error is this: using the outer world to decide whether the inner work is valid. You have done the inner work. You have prayed or affirmed or held the new state or planted the cause consciously. And then, not long after, sometimes within hours, the hand goes to the phone. The eyes check the screen. The mind drifts to the situation and asks quietly in the language of concern rather than fear, has it moved? Is there a sign? Has anything shifted? And you tell yourself you are simply staying aware, simply being responsible, simply checking in with reality. But notice what the checking is actually doing. Every time you go to the outer world to see if the inner work has produced visible results, you are structurally making the outer world the judge of the inner work. You are saying, in effect, I will know whether to continue believing based on what the appearance reports. And that is not discernment, that is divided allegiance, that is the outer world sitting on the throne of cause. Holmes would call this spiritual instability, not as a condemnation, but as a precise description of the inner state. Stability, in his framework, means that the inner authority remains settled, regardless of what the outer appearance is reporting. The cause is held as real because it is the cause, not because it has yet appeared as visible evidence. The person who can maintain that inner settlement is working from spiritual stability. The person whose inner state rises and falls with every check of the phone is working from spiritual instability, however sincere their prayer may be. This is not a comfortable observation, but it is a precise one. And the reason it matters is that spiritual instability does not simply describe the inner experience. It determines the quality of the cause that is being planted. A cause planted from a settled, authoritative inner state carries a different impression into the deep mind than a cause repeatedly questioned by an inner state that keeps running to the appearance for permission to believe. These are not the same planting. They do not produce the same harvest. Think about the language of the checking habit when it is honest. Has it worked yet? Can I believe now? Is there proof that I should keep going? Each of these questions is beautiful in its honesty, because each one reveals exactly where authority is still located. Not inward, not in the spiritual law, not in the accepted cause, but outward, in the result, in the confirmation, in the sign. And a sign that has not yet appeared is being read, consciously or not, as a sign that perhaps the cause was not strong enough, or perhaps the prayer was not heard, or perhaps the law does not apply to this situation, or perhaps you. And that last one is the one that damages the inner state most deeply. Perhaps you are the exception. Perhaps your situation is too difficult, too damaged, too old, too specific for the law to reach. This thought does not announce itself clearly. It arrives wrapped in the reasonable-sounding concern of simply checking the results. But it is fear. And fear, when it is given the authority of discernment, becomes a very effective creator of the very conditions it is afraid of. Checking from fear is not neutral. It is not a passive observation of reality. It is an active impression upon the subconscious. Every time you go to the appearance from a state of fear, hoping for relief, dreading what you might find, you are not simply reading the effect. You are impressing the deep mind with the emotional frequency of lack, of uncertainty, of the conclusion that the outer world has authority over whether you may believe. And that impression, held repeatedly, is its own form of cause. This is the hidden cost of constant checking that most people in the spiritual tradition never account for. They think of it as neutral information gathering. They do not see it as planting, but every act of attention is an act of impression. Where you look with emotion, with investment, with the held breath of hoped-for relief or dreaded confirmation, that is where the deep mind is receiving its instruction. And if that instruction is coming from the appearance, from the unchanged number, from the silence that stretches on, then the deep mind is receiving the instruction of the appearance, which is the instruction of the old cause. This is checking as spiritual instability. Not checking because you are weak or wrong or spiritually inferior, but checking in a way that has made the outer world the governing authority, the thing that decides whether the inner work was real, whether belief is warranted, whether the cause can be trusted. That governance must be corrected, not by refusing to check, but by deciding what is cause before checking, which is precisely the practical method Holmes's work points us toward. What discernment actually looks like is calm, from a stable inner state, engaging with outer conditions without being governed by them. It is noticing what the appearance reports without letting the report determine the authority of the cause. True spiritual discernment is not the absence of information. It is the presence of an ordered relationship between the one who reads the information and the source of inner authority. Discernment reads from above, fear checks from below, and that distinction is everything. There is one more thing to name here, and it is this. Constant checking is exhausting. This is not a coincidence. When the outer world is carrying the weight of your inner authority, when every piece of evidence becomes a case for or against your belief, when the inbox and the bank statement and the unanswered message are all deputized as judges of your spiritual state, the nervous system is never at rest. There is always another check to make, always another moment where the proof might finally arrive. And in the absence of proof, there is always the unspoken conclusion that it is not working. This exhaustion is the natural consequence of having reversed the order of cause, and it can only be resolved by restoring the order. And here is the central inversion, the one that, once seen clearly, makes every previous misunderstanding of the checking habit visible. You cannot wait for the effect to authorize the cause. You cannot require the outer world to grant permission before the inner world can believe. That permission structure is backwards. It is not simply inefficient. It is structurally impossible. It is asking the created thing to authorize the creator. It is asking the echo to confirm the voice. It is asking the harvest to validate the seed before the seed has been planted. Ernest Holmes located this inversion at the root of most spiritual failure. Not failure in the sense of divine abandonment, but failure in the sense of a spiritual practitioner who genuinely knows the law and still does not see results. The reason, Holmes taught, is almost always that the order has been reversed. Somewhere in the practice, the person has begun waiting for the outer world to tell them when it is safe to hold the inner state. And the outer world, which is always the effect, never the cause, is constitutionally incapable of making that declaration. Think about how this operates in prayer. You pray. You feel something shift briefly, and then the situation remains unchanged for days. So you pray again, but this time with a slightly different inner quality, a slight edge of asking, a slight lean toward desperation, because the outer world has not yet responded, and the unchanged appearance has been, however subtly, read as evidence that the first prayer did not reach. And so the second prayer carries that evidence as its inner tone, and the third prayer carries even more, until what began as a genuine inner decree has slowly become a petition from need, because the unchanged world was allowed to instruct the inner state. This is not the prayer of spiritual authority. This is not the prayer that Holmes described as scientific, as precise, as working with the law rather than begging above it. This is prayer that has given the outer world veto power over the inner state, and veto power over the inner state is veto power over the cause, which means the prayer is undermining itself in the very act of being prayed, because the act of returning to the appearance for permission has already interrupted the established cause. The world cannot give you permission to believe. The world is not designed to do that. The world is the response to belief, not its source. The outer condition is the projected image of an inner pattern. You cannot ask the projection to confirm the projector. The projector must operate first, and it must operate from its own authority, from the inner settlement of accepted cause, before the projection has changed. Because the projection will only change after the projector has changed, not simultaneously. After. Here is an example that makes this concrete. A person is dealing with financial pressure. They have worked inwardly. They have planted the cause of supply, of divine order, of God as source. They have felt something settle. And then a bill arrives, or the account does not change, or the client does not appear, and they go understandably to the outer world. And the outer world says, in the language of numbers, of silence, of delayed responses, nothing has changed yet. And the person, reading that report as instruction, allows their inner state to contract. They pull back from the cause, they return to the old story. They replant the seed of lack. And then they are confused that the harvest of lack continues. The world did not fail them. The law did not fail. The sequence was simply reversed. The inner state consulted the appearance before the appearance had any possible way of reflecting the new cause. And then the person allowed that premature reading of an old harvest to undo the new planting. The world was doing exactly what the world does. It was reporting the previous cause accurately. The error was in treating that report as a verdict on the new cause. The error was in expecting the effect to confirm the cause before the cause had been given time to express. This is why Holmes emphasized that working with the law requires what he sometimes described as a persistent inner stance, not stubborn denial of outer reality, but a rooted, steady holding of the inner cause that does not require the outer world to confirm it before it can be believed. The tree does not ask the fruit to confirm that the root is alive. The root operates from its own nature. The fruit comes in the season of its expression. The tree does not check the branch daily for fruit and conclude, upon finding none, that the root must be insufficient. The roots of your inner work are not visible to the eye that goes to the screen. They are operating in the deep mind, in the subconscious, in the layer of consciousness that Holmes said preceded and produced all visible conditions. And the correct relationship with that invisible work is not anxious surveillance. It is what he would describe as confident inner knowing, the kind of knowing that does not need the world to say yes before it believes, because it understands that the world will say yes only after the belief has been established as cause. You cannot wait for proof to begin. You cannot wait for the visible change before you hold the inner state as real and settled, because the inner state being real and settled is the cause that creates the visible change. If you wait for the change before holding the inner state, you are waiting for the effect to precede the cause, and effects never precede their causes. Not in the physical world, and not in the spiritual order. This is the correction Holmes places at the center of all practical spiritual work. Not a theological argument, not a doctrinal position, a functional correction of the order of operations. Cause first, effect after, inner state first, outer appearance after. Prayer from authority, not petition from fear. Inner command, then outer response. This is not a matter of spiritual superiority or of unusual faith. It is a matter of understanding how the law actually works, and then living in alignment with that understanding, rather than constantly reversing it out of the habit of seeking outer permission for inner authority. And this is where the practice begins to become very precise, because knowing that the world cannot give you permission is one thing. Having an actual method for establishing the cause before you check is another. The next section of this teaching will move directly into that method. There is a moment, and it is a very specific moment, that this teaching is centered on. It is the moment before the check. The instant before the hand reaches for the phone, the breath before the eyes go to the screen, the pause before the inbox opens, the half second between deciding to check and actually checking. That moment is where the law is either honored or reversed. And most people move through it so quickly, so automatically, so unconsciously, that they do not realize a decision is being made there at all. Holmes would say that the moment before you engage with the outer world is the moment of spiritual decision. Not the moment of prayer alone, though prayer matters, not the moment of affirmation alone, though affirmation has its function, but the moment of engagement, the moment when the inner world is about to make contact with the outer world, when the cause is about to encounter the effect. That moment is where the authority is either established or surrendered. What does it mean to establish the cause before checking? It means that before your eyes go to the outer report, you return inward, briefly but deliberately, and you name the cause that is governing your reality. Not the cause you hope is governing it. Not the cause you will believe if the number looks good. The cause you are choosing right now as the authority, before any outer evidence has been consulted. God is my source. Supply is already established at the level of cause. The inner pattern I am holding is real. The appearance I am about to see is an effect, not a verdict. This is not a long ritual. It is not a meditation that must precede every practical act. It is a deliberate inner reordering that takes seconds but changes the quality of the cause entirely. It is the difference between approaching the appearance as a student, waiting to be graded, and approaching it as a steward, calmly reading a report from a domain that you are responsible for. The first posture makes the outer world the authority. The second posture keeps the inner world as cause. The practical application is straightforward. Before you open the bank application, pause. Before you check whether the message has arrived, pause. Before you look at the views, the responses, the clinical result, the door that may or may not have opened, pause. In that pause, decide what is cause. Not as a performance of spiritual sophistication, not as a way to avoid responsibility, but as a real inner act of authority. Say it inwardly, say it aloud if needed, and mean it. I am checking this as a reading of effect. The cause is already established. God is my source. The appearance reports. It does not govern. Holmes was not asking anyone to pretend that conditions are other than they are. He was asking something far more demanding and far more honest than pretense. He was asking for a genuine inner ordering, a real settled recognition of where the authority belongs before the eyes go outward. Because what the eyes see will be filtered through the inner state that receives them. And the inner state that receives the outer appearance from a position of authority reads that appearance very differently than the inner state that receives it from a position of fear. Think about two people looking at the same bank balance. One of them is in fear, checking for permission to believe, hoping the number will be high enough to feel safe. They see the number and it is lower than expected. The inner state contracts. Fear deepens. The old story gets reinforced. The cause that is planted in the next moment is the cause of lack. The other person has paused before checking. They have established the cause inwardly. They check from that position. They see the same number. They read it as information. They make note of what practical action it might call for. But their inner state does not contract, because the number was never their source. God was. and that cause was established before the check. This is not the same experience. These are not two equally positioned people who happen to have different emotional reactions to the same data. These are two people with different relationships to cause. One of them is receiving instruction from the appearance, the other is reading a report from a position of established authority. And the cause being planted in the next moment will be different for each of them, which means the harvest of the next season will be different, which means the conditions of the coming weeks and months will be different. The moment before checking is the moment of spiritual decision. Most people do not know it is a decision. They reach for the proof automatically, from habit, from anxiety, from the reasonable-sounding conviction that staying informed is responsible. And perhaps it is responsible. But the question is not whether to check. The question is what state you are in when you do. What cause you have established before the eyes go outward. What inner authority you are bringing to the reading of the report. Holmes would say this very directly. Before you engage with the outer world, settle the inner world. Before you read the effect, establish the cause. Before you look at the appearance, return to the truth of your source. Not to deny the appearance, not to avoid the data, but to ensure that when you receive the data, you receive it from a position of inner authority rather than inner subordination. And now you might ask, what if the pause is difficult? What if the fear is already activated before the check begins? What if the inner state is already contracted, already in the grip of the old story, already in the posture of checking for permission rather than reading from authority? This is where the specific inner language of the cause decree becomes essential, because the cause decree is not a feeling you must manufacture. It is a decision you can make regardless of how you feel. And that decision, made repeatedly, begins to build the new inner pattern that makes the pause natural. Before the check, decide what is cause. This is the heart of this entire teaching. Everything else in this video is commentary on that one sentence. Before you look outward, look inward and name the cause. Not the cause you wish were true. Not the cause you will believe only if the appearance confirms it. The cause you are choosing right now as the governing authority of your inner world. God is the source. Consciousness precedes condition. The appearance reports. It does not govern. That decision, made in the moment before checking, changes the quality of the check entirely. It does not change the number. It does not change the silence. It does not alter the outer condition before it has been seen, but it changes the inner state that receives the outer condition. And that, in the teaching of Ernest Holmes, is everything. Because the inner state receiving the outer condition is not a passive observer. It is the next planting of cause. Holmes was not simply offering a psychological strategy for managing anxiety. What he was teaching was a description of how reality is actually structured. There is an order. There is a hierarchy of cause. And the hierarchy is not opinion. It is the nature of the creative process itself, working through consciousness into condition, working through inner cause into outer appearance, working through the accepted pattern of the deep mind into the visible circumstances of the life. The hierarchy Holmes placed before his students was this: God, or what he called the infinite intelligence, the creative source underlying all existence. This is the originating ground of all that is. Not a distant figure, not an external authority to be petitioned, but the very ground of being from which consciousness arises, in which all creative law is embedded, and through which all manifestation occurs. This is the first order, the source of all supply, all intelligence, all possibility. From that ground, the individual consciousness arises, not as a separate self cut off from the source, but as an individualized expression of it. The mind, in Holmes's framework, is not a small private mechanism locked inside the skull. It is a point of awareness within the infinite intelligence. It is the place where the universal creative capacity becomes personal and directed. It is the faculty through which the individual decides what to accept as true, what to impress upon the subconscious, what to hold as cause. And what the individual consciousness accepts as true becomes the instruction that the universal law enacts. Beneath the conscious mind is the subconscious, the deep mind, the inner receiver. This is not a place of mystery or mysticism. It is simply the layer of the mind that holds the accepted patterns, the impressed beliefs, the running instructions that the conscious self has given it over time. The subconscious does not evaluate. It does not argue. It does not distinguish between what is real and what is vividly imagined. It accepts the impression it receives and brings it into form through every process of the body, the nervous system, the behavior, the perception of opportunity, and the quality of the invisible influence the person carries into every situation they encounter. After the subconscious comes the condition, the outer appearance, the visible effect, the world as it currently presents itself to the senses. This is the last in the order of authority. Not because the outer world is unimportant, but because it is the output, not the input. It is the printout, not the programming. It is the display of what the deeper levels have accepted, not the source of what must be accepted. This is the new order of authority, not new in the sense of invented by Holmes, because this order runs through the classical spiritual teachings of many traditions. New in the sense that it is the corrected order, the one that restores the creative capacity to its right place after a lifetime of habitually reversing it. God, consciousness, subconscious impression, outer condition, in that order, always in that order. The error that checking from fear represents is the reversal of this order. It places the outer condition first. It says, "Let me see what the world reports, and then I will decide what my inner state should be. Let me see the number, and then I will decide whether to believe. Let me see the sign, and then I will decide whether the cause was real." This places the condition at the top of the hierarchy. It places the appearance in the position that belongs to God. And Holmes would say that this substitution is the root of spiritual confusion in the life of an otherwise sincere person. God cannot be reduced to a mental trick. This is important to hold. When Holmes spoke of consciousness as cause, when he taught that the inner state precedes the outer condition, he was not removing God from the equation and replacing the divine with willpower. He was saying the opposite. He was saying that God, the infinite creative intelligence, operates through consciousness. The law through which divine supply manifests is the law of inner cause expressed as outer condition. Prayer is not overriding this law. Prayer is aligning with it. Properly directed prayer is the act of returning the inner state to its right relationship with divine cause, so that the law can express what the divine intelligence already intends as abundance, as supply, as wholeness, as provision. This is why the order matters spiritually, and not only psychologically. Because if you reverse the order, you are not simply managing your emotions poorly. You are misaligning with the creative law of the universe. You are asking the expression to precede the source. You are asking the river to flow before the spring has been opened, and the spring, which is God expressing through consciousness, remains available always. But it requires the right relationship with it, the right inner posture, the cause placed first. Think about what this means for how you move through a day. Every moment in which you go to the outer world for instruction, for permission, for the verdict on whether belief is warranted, you are reversing the hierarchy. Every moment in which you return to God as source, settle the inner state in that truth, and then engage with the outer world from that position, you are honoring the hierarchy. And the hierarchy is not arbitrary. It is the structure of the creative law itself. This new order of authority is not a doctrine you must adopt. It is a description of how things actually work. You can work with it consciously, or you can work against it unconsciously, but you cannot escape it. Every condition in your life is, at this very moment, the current expression of the hierarchy as you have been living it consciously or not. The hierarchy is always operating. The only question is whether you are operating within it with awareness and deliberate choice, or against it from the habit of seeking outer permission. Holmes placed this order not to make the individual feel small before a cosmic law, but to restore to the individual the creative authority they had already given away to appearances. The order reveals that the power is not in the condition. It is not in the number, the silence, the closed door, the unchanged situation. The power is in the consciousness that precedes the condition, and consciousness is where you live. It is what you are working with in every moment of every day, which means the creative authority is never somewhere else. It is always available, always present, always prior to the appearance. Before the check, establish the order. God first, consciousness as cause, subconscious as receiver, outer condition as report. That is the sequence. That is the sacred structure. And once it is restored as the lived reality of the inner life, the entire relationship with the outer world begins to transform. Now the law becomes practical. The order of authority has been described. The inversion has been named. The moment before checking has been identified as the point of decision, and now we need something concrete, something you can actually use, not as a ritual that adds spiritual complexity to an already full life, but as a simple inner act of reordering that can be performed in seconds, anywhere, before any engagement with any outer condition. Holmes built his entire practical methodology on the principle that spiritual truth must become workable in the actual moments of daily life, not only in the sanctuary of meditation. The correction of inner authority is not a retreat practice. It is a moment-to-moment practice. It is the ongoing exercise of returning to the cause before consulting the effect. And the simplest tool for that returning is a set of directed inner questions. The first question is this: what am I accepting as cause right now? This is the question of inner inventory. Before you check the proof, before the eyes go outward, you pause and honestly ask what is currently functioning as the governing authority of your inner state. Is it God, the infinite creative source operating through your accepted consciousness? Or is it the old story, the feared number, the anticipated absence, the voice of the previous harvest? This is not a question designed to produce shame. It is a diagnostic. It is the honest act of looking at what is actually running in the deep mind before the check occurs. Most people, when they pause and genuinely ask this question in the moment before checking, discover that what they were about to accept as cause was fear, the anticipated disappointment, the expectation of the unchanged number, the rehearsal of the old story dressed as readiness for reality. And the discovery of that is not a failure. It is the beginning of the correction, because you cannot correct what you have not yet honestly named. The second question is this: what am I about to obey? This question moves one layer deeper than the first. It is asking about authority rather than content. Not just what fear is present, but which authority is about to receive your allegiance. Because checking from a state of inner fear is not simply an emotional experience. It is an act of obedience. It is placing the outer world on the throne of cause and kneeling before it as the final word on what is real. And that act of obedience, repeated daily, is what makes the appearance a governing authority in the life. When you ask, "What am I about to obey?" you are invoking your capacity to choose, not to deny the outer world, not to pretend the condition does not exist, but to recognize that you are about to assign authority to something, and that the assignment is a choice. You can obey the appearance, or you can obey the spiritual law. You can let the number decide your inner state, or you can let the truth of divine supply, accepted inwardly, remain as the cause that governs. The question does not make the choice for you, but it makes the choice visible, and visible choices can be made consciously. The third question is this: am I checking from fear or from authority? This is the question of posture. It is asking about the inner stance from which the engagement with outer conditions is about to occur. And it is a direct question because it admits only two honest answers. You are checking from fear, which means the outer world is carrying the weight of your authority, and you are going to it for relief, for permission, for the verdict. Or you are checking from authority, which means the inner cause is established, the source is named, and you are going to the outer world to read a report, calmly, from a position of inner settlement. Both of these positions will go to the same screen, will see the same number, will read the same message or absence of message. But they are not the same act. They produce different impressions on the deep mind. They plant different causes for the next season. And they determine whether the engagement with the outer world deepens the authority of fear or strengthens the authority of cause. These three questions are not a ritual to be performed only in spiritual emergencies. They are an inner habit to be developed through daily repetition until they become the natural shape of the moment before checking, until the pause before the screen becomes an automatic act of inner reordering, until the deep mind is so accustomed to being asked these questions that it begins to answer them before you consciously pose them. That is the spiritual habit Holmes was pointing toward. not a special practice for special moments, a new way of living in the ordinary moments of every day. What am I accepting as cause? What am I about to obey? Am I checking from fear or authority? 3 questions, seconds to ask, and a lifetime of inner reordering as the outcome when they are practiced with sincerity and consistency. Ask these questions before you open the application, before you check the inbox, before you read the report, before you receive the call, before you enter the conversation. Before any moment in which the outer world is about to speak into your inner world, pause, ask the 3 questions, and let the answers guide the inner state that you bring to the encounter. This is not complication. This is the simplest possible expression of the principle Holmes taught. Cause first, effect after. Inner authority established before outer engagement begins. Questions reveal the inner state, but a decree establishes the cause. There is a difference between examination and command. The 3 cause questions are acts of inner examination. They expose what is operating, what is being obeyed, what posture is in place. And that examination is necessary, but examination alone does not plant the new cause. Something more is needed, something that moves the inner state from inventory to declaration, from recognition to command. Holmes distinguished between the prayer of petition and the prayer of affirmation. He was not speaking of simple positive thinking. He was speaking of a deliberate inner act in which the individual consciousness aligns with the spiritual truth of divine supply, of wholeness, of God as source, and declares that truth is already real at the level of cause, not as a future hope, not as a request for a favor, as an accepted present reality that the law will express as visible condition in its own timing. The cause decree for this teaching is this: I decide cause before proof. The appearance reports. It does not govern. This is the exact statement, not a long prayer, not a complicated affirmation, 2 sentences that together perform the full reordering of inner authority. The first sentence is the act of will. I decide, not I hope, not I want, not I am trying to believe. I decide. Decision is the language of cause. It is the language of the individual consciousness exercising its creative authority within the divine order. I decide cause before proof. I am establishing the inner state before the outer world has spoken. The cause is determined inward. The proof will follow outward. The second sentence is the relocation of authority. The appearance reports. It does not govern. This is not a denial of the appearance. It is a precise assignment of function. The appearance has a legitimate function. It reports. It tells you what the current expression of the previous inner cause looks like. It provides information for practical action. That is valuable. That is honest. But governing is a different function. Governing means naming the future, assigning authority, deciding what must be believed. And the appearance does not have that function. The appearance reports. God governs. Consciousness causes. The deep mind receives. The outer condition expresses, in that order. Say this decree before checking. Say it sincerely, not as a magical phrase, but as a real inner act of reordering. And say it regardless of how you feel in the moment. This is important. The cause decree is not a feeling, it is a decision. And decisions can be made in moments when the feeling has not yet aligned. The feeling is not the cause, the decision is. And the decision, held consistently and impressed upon the deep mind through repetition, eventually does produce the corresponding feeling. But it begins as will, not as emotion. When you say the cause decree before checking, you are performing the act Holmes described as treating, not treating in the sense of medicine, but in the sense of inner spiritual treatment. You are treating the inner state. You are moving it from the posture of fear checking to the posture of cause establishing. You are relocating authority from the outer screen to the inner source. And then, from that position, you check, you read, you engage with the report. But you do it as the cause reading the effect, not as the effect waiting for the cause. Do not multiply the decree with additions and alternatives. The power of a decree is in its simplicity and its consistency. Holmes taught that what the deep mind hears repeatedly and accepts as real becomes the creative instruction it enacts. A single clear decree, used consistently in the moment before checking, will impress the deep mind far more effectively than a dozen varying affirmations used inconsistently. Return to this one. I decide cause before proof. The appearance reports. It does not govern, and let this decree become your inner posture before every significant engagement with the outer world. Before the financial conversation, before the medical appointment, before the business decision, before the prayer, before any moment in which the outer world is about to present its current report, and your inner state is about to decide whether to receive that report as instruction or as information. The decree draws that line. It does not draw it on the outside, it draws it inside, in the place where cause is actually determined. Write this decree somewhere visible if it helps. Say it aloud in the morning before the first check of the day. Return to it at night before sleep. Let it be the inner reset that returns authority to its right place before the eyes go to the screen. Not as performance, not as spiritual theater, as a genuine, repeated, sincere act of inner reordering that, over days and weeks, begins to build a new pattern in the deep mind, a pattern that knows at the level of habit where the cause lives, and that pattern, impressed deeply enough, becomes the natural stance, the resting posture, the automatic authority that does not need to be invoked consciously because it has become the inner home. That is the destination Holmes was pointing toward, not a person who has to work hard to avoid being governed by appearances, but a person who has so thoroughly established cause as the governing inner authority that appearances are simply read as reports, calmly and clearly, without the inner state being disturbed by what they show. That person is not in denial. They are in order, and from order they act. From cause they move. From divine supply they give and receive. That is the life the law is pointed toward, and the decree is one of the earliest steps in building it. From the very beginning of this teaching, one question has been held open. You have felt it, perhaps without naming it. If the checking habit is the reversal of order, if proof cannot authorize cause, if the appearance cannot grant permission to believe, then what is proof for? Why does it arrive at all? And when it does arrive, when the outer world does begin to reflect the inner work, what is actually happening in that moment? This is the resolution, and it is the central revelation of this teaching. Proof is not the doorway into belief. Proof is the echo of accepted cause. It is not the beginning of the creative process. It is the expression of what was already completed at the level of cause. When the visible world begins to change, when the number shifts, when the door opens, when the supply arrives through an unexpected channel, when the situation moves in the direction of the inner work, it is not the moment at which the law begins to operate. It is the moment at which the law, having already operated at the invisible level, becomes visible to the senses. Holmes was precise about this. The cause is complete at the level of consciousness before the effect is visible in the outer world. When a person has genuinely accepted a new inner pattern, when the deep mind has truly received the impression of supply, of wholeness, of divine order, the law is already enacted. The expression of that law in the visible world is not the event that makes it real. The real event has already occurred at the level of cause. The visible expression is simply the outer report of an inner completion. This reframes the entire experience of waiting. If you are holding the inner cause with genuine settlement, with the quality of accepted completion that Holmes described as the fulfilled state, then the period between the inner planting and the outer expression is not a period of uncertainty. It is a period of gestation. The cause has been established, the law is working, the outer expression is coming. The timing belongs to the law. Your part during that period is not to keep checking whether the cause has taken hold. Your part is to maintain the inner state from which the cause was planted, to not reopen the ground before the seed has had time to grow. Think about how this changes the relationship with time. So much of the anguish of spiritual practice is located in the gap between the inner work and the visible result. That gap is experienced as uncertainty when the inner state is unstable. When the checking habit governs, every day the outer world does not yet reflect the inner work is experienced as a day of potential failure, of possible divine silence, of wondering whether the law applies in this case. And each of those days plants, through the very act of checking from fear, a new cause of lack, a new impression of unmet prayer, a new instruction to the deep mind that the supply has not yet come. But when the inner state is stable, when the cause has been established and the authority is not surrendered to the unchanged appearance, the gap is experienced differently, not as evidence of failure, not as proof that the prayer was not heard, but as the natural unfolding of the law. The time between planting and harvest is not empty time. It is not silence from God. It is the law at work in the invisible layer, enacting the cause that was planted, moving supply through channels not yet visible, preparing the expression that will eventually reach the surface of the visible world. Holmes taught that the most common reason sincere people do not see the results of their inner work is that they dismantle the inner cause during the gap. They plant in the morning and uproot in the evening. They decree on Sunday and surrender on Monday. They accept the cause in prayer and reject it in the moment of checking. And the deep mind, receiving these contradictory instructions, does not know what to enact. The law cannot work cleanly through a consciousness that is divided between cause and proof, between inner decree and outer permission. The revelation is this: the moment you genuinely stop needing proof in order to believe, the conditions under which proof arrives change, not because the law rewards you for strength of will, but because the inner cause, when it is no longer being interrupted by the checking habit, can finally complete its natural expression without being dismantled in the gap. You are not withholding proof from yourself by checking, but you are, in the act of checking from fear, potentially replanting the seed of the old cause in the same moment you are expecting to see the new one grow. Proof is the echo. The voice precedes it. And the voice is the inner state that has settled into acceptance, that has genuinely impressed the deep mind with the truth of supply, that has placed God as source rather than the outer condition as source. When that voice is clear and consistent, the echo comes. In its timing, through its channels, in the form that the law, working through the infinite intelligence, determines is the right expression. Your part is not to force the echo. Your part is to keep the voice clear. And here is the final layer of this revelation. When proof does arrive, when the outer world does begin to show the expression of the inner work, the spiritually mature person receives it not as the validation of the prayer, but as the echo of it. They do not say, "Now I know the law is real." They already knew. They say, "The law is expressing now in this form." They do not grant the arrival of proof authority over their belief system, because they did not require proof before believing. And therefore proof, when it comes, is simply the natural and expected outer expression of an already established inner cause. This is the order restored, not hope validated by result, but cause expressed as result. Inner work completed first, outer expression following as effect, proof coming after authority, not before it, never before it, always in the right order after. There will be moments in this life when you must check, when you must look at the account, the report, the result, the condition. This teaching is not an instruction to close your eyes to reality. Holmes never taught spiritual blindness. He taught spiritual order. And spiritual order includes the wise, mature, practical engagement with outer conditions. Read from a position of established inner authority. The question is not whether to look at the outer world. The question is, who is looking, and from what position? Is the inner state that engages with the outer condition the fearful inner state that has given the appearance governing authority? Or is it the spiritually ordered inner state that has established the cause before the look, and that reads the appearance as a report rather than a decree? To check without surrendering is to approach the outer condition from the established inner cause. It is to engage with the information the world provides while retaining the authority that was established before the engagement began. It means reading the number honestly and clearly, allowing it to inform practical action, without allowing it to reassign the authority of your inner state. It means hearing the difficult news without letting the difficulty become a new instruction to the deep mind about what must be permanent. Here is what this looks like in practice. You pause before looking. You say the cause decree or an equivalent inner act of reordering. You establish inwardly that God is your source, that the appearance is a report, that the cause has already been established at the level of consciousness. Then you look, you see what is there. You allow it to inform your practical decisions. If the account is lower than needed, you acknowledge it honestly and ask what practical action serves the situation wisely. If the result is not yet what you were working toward, you note it clearly and ask what inner work or outer action the situation calls for. You do not pretend the condition does not exist. You engage with it wisely, but throughout that engagement, the inner authority remains. The cause does not move. The established inner pattern does not contract because the outer report shows the old condition. You hold the dual awareness that Holmes pointed toward, the awareness of the outer fact as it is, and the inner truth of the cause that is already established and moving toward expression. This dual awareness is not contradiction. It is spiritual maturity. It is the capacity to acknowledge what is without accepting it as what must forever be. This is also how fear is prevented from ruling the practical sphere of life. Some people, when they hear teachings about inner authority and consciousness as cause, conclude that they should not make practical plans or take practical action until the inner state is perfectly ordered. This is not what Holmes taught. He taught that practical wisdom and inner spiritual order are not opposed. They are complementary. The practical action taken from a position of established inner authority is different in quality from the practical action taken from panic. Both may look similar from the outside, but one is action from the cause, the other is action from the fear of the old effect. Check the account, read the report, open the inbox, attend the appointment, make the plan, take the step, but check from the established cause. Read from the position of inner authority. Open the inbox after having relocated the source from the inbox to God. Make the plan from supply rather than from scarcity. Take the step from the direction of wholeness rather than the direction of fear. This is not a performance, this is the practical application of the law in the moments where the outer world makes its presence felt most strongly. And when the outer world shows something difficult, when the report is unwelcome, when the condition has not yet moved, when the proof has not yet arrived in the form or timing you hoped for, you can hold that honestly without surrendering the cause. Acknowledge it. Allow the appropriate response, practical, prayerful, or simply patient, but do not allow it to overwrite the inner decree. Do not allow the unchanged appearance to file a successful objection against the established cause. The cause has been decided. The appearance is reporting the previous season. The new season is already underway at the invisible level, and the outer expression will come. Holmes pointed his students toward what he called the state of spiritual poise. This is not the absence of difficulty. It is not the pretense that conditions are better than they are. It is the settled, quiet, inwardly rooted recognition that the outer condition is never the final word, because the outer condition is always the effect, and the cause, which is always inward, can always be renewed. Spiritual poise is what allows a person to look at an unwelcome condition and say, truthfully and without performance, this is what is currently expressed. This is not what must forever be. And the cause I am holding right now is already planting the next expression. Check, but check from authority. Look, but look from the established cause. Engage with the outer world fully, practically, wisely, responsibly. But engage from the right position, from the position of the cause that precedes the condition, from the inner state that has already decided what governs, before the screen loaded, before the number appeared, before the report arrived. That is the spiritual maturity Holmes was developing in his students, and it is what this teaching is inviting you toward. Consider a person in the middle of a difficult season. They are dealing with financial pressure, not catastrophic, but real and present. There are bills that need attention, a project that has stalled, a silence where a response was expected weeks ago. They have been working inwardly. They have prayed with sincerity. They have affirmed supply. They have tried to hold the new inner state. And they believe in the principle, at least in theory. They believe that consciousness precedes condition. They have read the books, or listened to the teachings, or prayed in the way they were taught. But every morning, before anything else, before the day has fully begun, the phone is in the hand. The applications open, the numbers are checked, The inbox is scanned, the project metrics are viewed, the expected response is searched for. And in the few seconds between opening the application and seeing the numbers, there is that held breath, that quiet, desperate hope that something will have changed overnight, that the law will have left some visible trace, that there will be a sign. And when the sign does not appear, when the numbers are the same or lower, when the inbox is silent, when the situation looks the same as it did the evening before, something contracts inside them. Not dramatically, not into despair necessarily, but a small contraction, a quiet withdrawal of the inner state from the position it had been trying to hold, a subtle return to the old story, the familiar inner conversation that says, maybe it is not working, maybe my situation is different, maybe the law does not reach this far or go this deep or apply in a case like mine. And then they try again, another prayer, another affirmation, another attempt to hold the inner state. And the cycle begins again, because the next morning the phone will be checked again, and the held breath will return, and the sign will or will not have appeared, and the inner state will respond accordingly. The outer world is completely in charge of their inner state, not because they have chosen it to be, but because the habit of checking from hope and receiving from fear has made it so. Notice what is happening to the cause in this cycle. Each time they pray, they plant something. Each time they check and the sign has not appeared, they receive an impression that the planting has not worked. Each time they allow the unchanged appearance to speak into their inner state, they are receiving a new instruction to the deep mind, one that says, the prayer has not been answered, the supply has not moved, the condition is unchanged. And that impression, received daily, is the cause that the law then enacts, not the prayer. The impression received in the moment of checking. The prayer is sincere, the desire is real, the inner work is genuine, but it is being systematically undermined by the act of seeking confirmation from the outer world before the inner cause has had time to become visible expression. The sign is being sought in the one place it cannot yet appear, because signs are always behind causes, and causes have not yet been given the uninterrupted inner residence that would allow their expression to move through the law into the visible world. This is not a story about someone who lacks faith or spiritual understanding or sincere desire. It is a story about someone who has not yet made the decision about what is cause. They are holding both. They are saying, consciousness is cause, but they are practicing, the appearance is judge, and the deep mind is receiving both instructions simultaneously, which is why the expression of the cause is perpetually delayed. Not because the law is failing, because the law is enacting exactly the divided inner state it is being given as instruction. We do not watch this person with judgment. We watch them with the recognition of something familiar, because this pattern, the sincere inner work followed by the anxious outer check, followed by the inner contraction, followed by the renewed attempt, is not unusual. It is the most common form that spiritual sincerity takes in a life that has not yet been fully reordered around the principle of cause first, and the compassion this deserves is the compassion of being given the precise correction that will actually change the pattern. Now consider the same person, same bills, same stalled project, same silence, same financial pressure. Nothing in the outer world has changed, but something has shifted inward. They have heard this teaching or some version of it. They have understood, not just intellectually, but at the level of daily practice, that the moment before checking is the moment of spiritual decision, and they have chosen to practice the cause decree. In the morning before the phone is picked up, they pause. It is a short pause, seconds, not an extended meditation, but it is a real pause. And in that pause they say the decree, not as a performance, not as a desperate attempt to trick the outer world into cooperating, as a genuine inner act of reordering. I decide cause before proof. The appearance reports. It does not govern. They feel the inner state shift slightly from the posture of checking for permission to the posture of reading a report. They name God as their source. They hold the truth that supply is already established at the level of cause. And then they open the application. The numbers are the same. The inbox is still silent. The project has not moved overnight. And they look at these things clearly, honestly, Without pretense, they see exactly what is there. They acknowledge the current reality of the condition. They make a note of what practical action the situation calls for, perhaps following up on the stalled project, perhaps reviewing the financial plan, perhaps taking one deliberate step that the situation requires. They engage with the outer world practically and wisely, but the inner state does not contract, because the number was never their source, the inbox was never the judge of their prayer. The project metrics were never the authority over their inner cause. They had already decided what governed before the check occurred, and so the check, however it read, was received as information, as a report from the current condition, not as a verdict on the cause, not as evidence against the prayer, not as permission refused. And then they go about their day from that position, not with performed positivity or strained cheerfulness, but with the quiet, grounded steadiness of a person who knows where the source is and has decided deliberately to honor the order of cause before proof. When conversations arise about the bills or the project, they engage honestly and practically. They do not claim the supply has already arrived in visible form, but they do not accept the absence of visible supply as evidence that supply has been refused. They hold the dual awareness, the current outer reality, and the inner established cause, without allowing the outer to overwrite the inner. Over time, the inner state becomes more consistently ordered. The checking habit does not disappear immediately, but it changes in quality. It moves from the held breath of hoped-for permission to the calm engagement of a steward reading a report. The deep mind begins to receive a consistent instruction of supply, of cause established, of God as source, and the law, receiving that consistent instruction, begins to express it in the outer conditions of the life, not dramatically overnight, in the way that all genuine causes express, through the channels the law provides, in the timing the law determines, in the forms that the infinite intelligence opens. For the next 7 days you are invited into one specific practice, not a long list of spiritual exercises, not a complex program that requires significant restructuring of your daily life. One practice performed consistently at every moment when you are about to engage with outer conditions for information. Before you check any outer proof, say the cause decree. I decide cause before proof. The appearance reports. It does not govern. Say it inwardly. Say it aloud if possible. Say it with genuine intent rather than as a mechanical repetition. Let it be a real act of inner reordering before the eyes go to the screen. Do this before opening the bank application, before checking the inbox, before reviewing the project results, before entering the difficult conversation, before receiving any report from any part of the outer world that carries emotional weight for you. In every one of those moments, pause and say the decree first. Establish the cause before the proof is consulted. Keep it simple. This is not an invitation to add spiritual commentary to every act of daily life. It is an invitation to insert one deliberate moment of inner reordering at the specific point where, before now, the outer world was silently being given governing authority. Just the pause, just the decree, just the relocation of cause to its right position before the eyes go outward. Notice what happens over 7 days. Notice how the inner state receives outer conditions differently when the cause has been established before the check. Notice whether the quality of fear in the act of checking changes. Notice whether practical action feels different when it arises from a position of established inner cause rather than from the contraction of an inner state that has just received a difficult report. The practice itself will teach you more than any explanation can. After 7 days, the practice will not be complete. The inner reordering that Holmes was describing is not a 7-day project. It is a new way of living in relationship to the outer world, a new inner habit that deepens over months and years of consistent application. But 7 days is enough to feel the difference. 7 days is enough to begin to see how the quality of the cause changes when it is established before the proof rather than conditioned upon it. Write this in the comments as your decree. I choose cause before proof, not as a performance for others to see, as a public inner act, as a declaration of the shift you are choosing, as the beginning of the practice in writing, made visible, held accountable to your own stated intention. The law works through consciousness, and consciousness works through what is accepted, declared, and held as real. Let your comment be the first outer expression of the inner cause you are planting through this teaching. If this teaching has opened something in you, if the law as Holmes taught it has landed with the precision that changes something in the inner order, subscribe to Sacred Logic. Not because of obligation, because this channel is a curriculum. Each teaching in this series is built on the one before it and opens the one that follows. And the curriculum is pointed toward one thing: the restoration of inner authority, the return to cause, the reordering of the life around the principle that consciousness precedes condition, God is source, and the outer world reports what the inner world has established. This is not the end of this thread of teaching. The next teaching in the Sacred Logic curriculum will carry this further. If this video has named the principle that the appearance reports but does not govern, the next teaching will go deeper into what it means to live as the cause. To inhabit the inner state not just before checking, but throughout the entirety of the day. The teaching is called appropriately, You Are the Cause. And if you have understood what was opened in this video, that teaching will be the next necessary step in the curriculum you are building within yourself. Ernest Holmes spent his life translating the invisible order of the law into the visible language of practical inner correction, not to give people a technique for manipulating the outer world, but to restore to every sincere practitioner the understanding that the creative authority was never lost. It was only mislocated. It was given through the habit of seeking outer permission to the very conditions it was meant to precede. And once that misallocation is seen clearly, the correction is not difficult. It is not the result of spiritual achievement or unusual faith. It is the result of understanding the order and choosing moment by moment to live within it. Before you check for proof, decide what is cause. The appearance is a report. God is the source. Consciousness is the cause. The deep mind receives the instruction. The outer world expresses the accepted pattern. This is the law. This is the order. This is the sacred logic that governs every condition in your life, whether you are currently working with it consciously or against it through the habit of seeking proof before establishing cause. The law is always operating. The only question is whether you are the one deciding what it enacts. Like this video if it has brought a new precision to the way you understand cause and proof. Subscribe to continue the Sacred Logic curriculum and carry the decree into the moments that need it most, not as words, as an established inner authority. I decide cause before proof, the appearance reports. It does not govern.